Let's continue with our series on Exodus, the biblical Moses that Hollywood forgot. Now, previously, in Exodus, the biblical Moses that Hollywood forgot. In other words, that which we looked at last week. You'll remember Moses, he had seen the burning bush. He was sent on a divine commission. He went with Zipporah and his children on the way. They got into problems because they had violated the Abrahamic covenant by not circumcising their younger son. And Moses sends Zipporah and the children away, takes only Aaron with them. And here we, here we have the recap. Moses told Aaron all the words of the Lord which he had sent him, and all the signs that he'd commanded him to do. So they're back in Egypt. Moses has returned to Egypt with Aaron, his spokesman, and Moses and Aaron went and assembled all the elders of the sons of Israel. And Aaron spoke all the words. You'll remember, they have this convoluted game of telephone, right? God speaks to Moses, Moses speaks to Aaron, Aaron speaks to the people. So Aaron spoke all the words which the Lord had spoken to Moses. He then performed the signs in the sight of the people. Hey, dig this. My staff turns into a snake, and I can follow that up with now you see it, now you don't. Leprous hand, no, clean hand. Leprous hand, clean hand. And then the little precursor, of course, to the first plague, turning some drinking water from the Nile into blood. Not too much, because first of all, you don't want to spoil the drama of the first plague, but also, why go around spoiling perfectly good drinking water? You know, I mean, it's one thing if you're going to turn the water into wine, that's one story. But if you're going to turn the water into blood, it's another. So, but nonetheless, he did the signs that God gave him to do to back up his credentials, to validate his credentials. And the people buy in to the program of Moses as the deliverer sent by God to liberate them from slavery. So the people believed very clearly that they believed in God as if they didn't believe in God before, that they believed that Moses was God's chosen deliverer. And when they heard that the word was the Lord, that's the covenant name of God. When you see the capital L-O-R-D like that, that is the ineffable name of God. We substitute the capital Lord or Adonai or the Hashem or the name or different pronunciations that we know are not accurate, like Jehovah, but the Lord, the covenant name. When I say covenant name, I'm talking about the name under which God revealed the Abrahamic covenant to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The Lord was concerned about the sons of Israel, and they had seen their affliction, and they bowed low and worshiped. So, thanking God, finally, it looks like we're going to get out of here. And now we pick up the narrative, and this is another section. Chapter 5 begins another major section of the text. And I call this the Battle of the Gods. This next section is a lengthy section, Battle of the Gods. And in this section that we're going to look at today, we see round 1. And for your viewing pleasure, we begin with a scene from chapter 5. Afterward, Moses and Aaron came and said to Pharaoh, "Thus said the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go." He didn't sing it, "Let my people go." He said it, "Let my people go." Now, not "let my people go," period, like in the movies. But look at this. Moses meets with Pharaoh. It's a new Pharaoh, not the Pharaoh who tried to kill him. Meets with the king of Israel, king of Egypt, rather, and says, "Thus says the Lord," using the covenant name of God. Again, this is the name of our God is what he uses. "Thus says Jehovah, Adonai, Hashem. Thus says the Lord, who is the God of Israel. The God of Israel has a name. This is his name, right? And I'm quoting him, let my people go, that they may celebrate a feast to me in the wilderness. So God had previously indicated, in the previous chapter, he'd indicated to Moses that Pharaoh was in no way going to cooperate with the Lord's plan and program for the Hebrews. So what we're going to see unfolding over not just this chapter, but through the next 6 chapters, all the way through chapter 11, we're going to see unfolding in the narrative is not merely a surface conflict between Pharaoh and Moses. Those are not the two combatants here, right? This is not the battle between Pharaoh and Moses. This is the more potent conflict between the ultimate opponents. In this corner, weighing in at, 170 pounds, Pharaoh, the god of Egypt. And in this corner, can't be weighed, can't be measured, can't be quantified, the Lord, the God of Israel. And these two gods are going to square off through chapter 11. And this is round 1. And Moses and Aaron were granted audience with Pharaoh. And he was instructed, you'll remember, to communicate to the king a very minimal request from the Lord. Not the whole enchilada, which is Hebrew, by the way, for enchilada. Not the whole thing, a simple minimal request. Let my people go temporarily for the purpose of holding a religious festival in the wilderness. In other words, just outside the border of Egypt, short term, just a worship. So just going to take, let's say, a week or so off so that we can worship our God. Very simple request. That, however, is not going to be responded to by Pharaoh positively. Pharaoh responds this way, quite antagonistically, to this very basic appeal. And his antagonistic response sets the whole tone, sets the whole context for the remainder of Pharaoh's role in this narrative. And he asks the text's key question. And this question hangs over this entire conflict. It's not just the key question of chapter 5, but it's the key question of 5 through 11. And for readers today, it's the key question that Moses' text asks of us 3,500 years later, as asked generation after generation after generation. Who is the Lord? Who is Jehovah? Who is Adonai? Who is this one you call by the name? You don't even pronounce his name. Literally, who is Jehovah? It's not a mere rhetorical question on the king's part, as in, I don't feel like recognizing the authority of your God. But he's literally saying, we got 80 some odd ancient Egyptian gods here, but not one of them is known as this name, the Lord. I literally do not know this. When you're a god, you kind of know everybody else in the club. And it's a very limited club, 80 members or so in Egypt, you know, first among equals. And there's nobody in the club called the Lord. So, who is the Lord? I don't know him. And since I don't know him, never heard of him, I certainly am not going to recognize his authority. Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice, his request to let Israel go? I do not know the Lord. And P.S. Besides, translated here, I like my P.S. better. I will not let Israel go. The Lord has already provided the answer to the question, who is the Lord, for the readers, right? So Moses knows who is the Lord. He met him at the burning bush. But the remainder of Exodus's Egyptian chapters are going to flesh out just who this Lord is for the Hebrews and to the Egyptians as well. Then they said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please, this is the request. It is so minimal. Not asking for freedom, just a brief vacation. Let us go a 3 days journey into the wilderness that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. That's what he meant by a feast, a festival, a religious holiday, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. Otherwise, he will fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword. Does Moses mean us as in the Hebrews, or us, all of us right here? If you don't let us go, something might happen. And so, when we think about this God of the Hebrews and the question, who is the Lord? The 10 plagues that are going to be unfolding shortly are each divinely designed to remedy Pharaoh's problem. Pharaoh identifies his problem right there. He's actually a good diagnostic, Pharaoh. Way to go. You don't know who the Lord, the God of Israel, is. And God is going to provide this king an unforgettable introduction. And in a universal sense, of course, God is the Lord of all. But in a very specific sense, verse 3 is right. God can be designated as the God of the Hebrews. By the way, FYI, term Hebrews, and it's kind of passé today to use the term Hebrew as if there's something wrong with the word or whatever, or we only speak of Hebrew in regard to language. We dare not speak of Hebrew as an ethnicity, but in Exodus, for sure, this is the preferred terminology that Moses uses when referring to the Israelites. He speaks of them as Hebrews. In time gone by, I've been in the Messianic movement long enough, all my life, a fourth generation Jewish believer. And when I was brought up, the proper, in vogue term for a Jewish believer was a Hebrew Christian, which actually I thought was a lot less confusing than some of the other terminology that is in vogue today. Because Christian was modified, Christian was the noun. I'm a Christian. And the noun is modified by my ethnicity. Right? So, in other words, when I say I'm a Hebrew Christian, everybody understood you were a Jewish Christian. You use terms today like Messianic Jew, it seems like they're almost designed to antagonize other Jewish people, because to be a Jew, you could be speaking in the term of ethnically, you're ethnically Jewish, but it also could be used as your religion, right? The Jewish religion. Jews who are religious are also called Jews. So bagels and lox on the weekends, Jews, ethnic Jews, in other words, are called Jews, but very religious, Orthodox, conservative, reform, they're also called Jews. So if you say I'm a Messianic Jew, it's like, yeah, it's very confusing and indeed antagonistic, because it seems like you're trying to synchronize two different religions, two different religious systems. And they rightfully can say, no, Judaism has the right to reject you. There's no such thing as a Christian Judaism. They're right. To which I say, well, yes, that's right. But there is a Jewish Christianity. And so the terms that we use, when we know we're speaking with an audience that knows what we mean when we're talking, we can be a little bit less careful with our terminology. But we have to be very careful and sensitive when we're speaking to Jewish people, that we don't use a word that is there's no antagonistic value in it to us, but for them it pushes a button, right? Why push someone's button without cause? Right? Jesus is a sufficient button to press, believe me. You know, the Jesus button is the only button you need, right? You don't need to be confusing the issue because you have issues in your own self-identity. Gee, am I Jewish enough? I believe in Jesus, and now I'm going to have a crisis of identity. Have I abandoned my people? And maybe I can just hold on to the term Jew, right? Nobody's taking the term Jew away from you. You're Jewish, ethnically. But why confuse? Am I making sense to you? Because that's a real issue. In the Messianic congregation, in the Messianic world, this is a real issue. And I think our conversations can be much more effective when we remove distracting issues like that. But I know the ship of Hebrew Christian has sailed. I'm not going to stand on a soapbox and try to get that to come back. It's not coming back. That ship's gone. But my point is that it's a perfectly good biblical term for ethnic Jewish people, for the people of Israel, to be calling them Hebrews. You'll remember we actually have a New Testament letter to a group called the Hebrews, right? It wasn't sent to Ireland, right? It wasn't sent to China. It's to the Jewish believers, right? So they apparently, in the ancient world, had no problem identifying the Jewish believers as Hebrew Christians. So that was a little extra thrown in for nothing, no extra charge. But the God of the Hebrews has met with us, right? So let us go on a short journey beyond the border of Egypt. Total duration of travel, 3 days there, 3 days back, 6 days, and then a day for worship, or maybe an extra day, right? Maybe 7, 8 days for worship. And, listen, when Moses says, otherwise he'll fall upon us with pestilence or this, Moses knows from personal experience, read just the end of the previous chapter, that God doesn't mess around, right? And if you disobey him, his reaction might be pretty severe. You're going to have a consequence to disobedience. So let's all get along here and just go with it. But Pharaoh's not going to buy that. And his immediate concern is clearly to make known to Moses the consequence. You talk about consequences? Let me make this clear to you, Moses. Here's the consequence to those who challenge my royal authority. Boom. The king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why do you draw the people away from their work? Let them go back to their labors. And in fact, you, former prince, now spokesman for the slaves, get back to your labors. Again, Pharaoh said, look, the people of the land are now many. You Israelites, you Hebrews, you sure do know how to multiply. And you would have them cease from their labors? First of all, remember that the whole idea of slavery was to slow down the procreation of the Hebrews. Didn't really do its job. But how much more, first of all, would they reproduce if they even had a week off, right? I know what they're going to be doing during that week. Worshiping God. What kind of worship, okay? There are already too many. Or maybe if they have time on their hands, there's so many of them in comparison, ratio of Hebrews to the Egyptians. If they stop working, maybe they'll pose a threat to the Egyptians. Right? So if they have energy to worship the Lord, to go 3 days journey, 3 days back, and sacrifice and worship to their God for a day or two, we must not be working hard enough, right? They're slaves, and they should be so tired that even if we gave them a week off, they don't have time or energy to travel and worship their God. So we must not be working them sufficiently hard. So the same day, Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters over the people and their foremen, and this is what he said. You are no longer to give the people straw to make brick as previously. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. So let me make it very clear. First of all, he tells the taskmasters of the people, who are the Hebrew slaves who are appointed to watch over and make sure they are, the chiefs of the people who are making sure that all the quotas are met. And the foremen are officers, right? And they are instructed, do not supply straw for making bricks. Now, they're not to make brick. You can't make bricks without straw. If you make bricks without straw, you're making mud pies. Okay? You can't build with just mud. The straw is a binding agent. Okay? It holds the mud brick together. And then the genetic component of the straw, as it breaks down at the agricultural, as it breaks down over time, the DNA of that spreads into the mud. I mean, we know this because we still have mud bricks today. I'll show you in a second. That have stood the test of time. 2,000, 3,000-year-old brick, right? So made with straw. So you can't make it without straw. You need the straw. So what are you going to do if the straw is not provided by the government? In order to make a brick, you've got to gather the straw yourself. So if they thought their job was hard, it's now doubly so. Because they're not only going to be doing what they were doing, but now they have to get up earlier in the morning, go collect straw, chop the straw up, and mix it into the clay to increase the brick's durability, like a binding agent, right? So can you imagine the exponential increase in the labor as they now have double the job? But the quota of bricks which they are making previously, you shall impose on them. You are not to reduce any it. Same job, now double. Because they are lazy. Therefore they cry out, let us go and sacrifice to our God. If they were good, hard-working slaves, they wouldn't have the energy to sacrifice to their God. These, ladies and gentlemen, we have these mud brick, and you can actually see the straw sticking out of it. This is poking, protruding out of these bricks. These are ancient bricks found, actually, this is from Egypt. The ancient bricks that I'm not saying that they extend back to the time of Moses and Pharaoh, but they're ancient bricks and they're still around. And we see this through Israel, we see this through Egypt. Mud brick, brick with straw, and you can see the decomposing straw, some of it's still. Those of you who went to Israel with me, when we went to Hatzor, we saw the mud brick, the Canaanite mud brick walls and structure. You remember that? Right? I'm not the only person who saw it, right? Okay. These same bricks. And again, once you expose them, you remember they're covered with tin roofs, right? And even remember the gate of Abraham that we saw that dates, it's about 4,000-year-old gate, 3,900-year-old gate in Dan, at Tel Dan. Tel Dan what? I don't remember. But at Tel Dan, you have this ancient gate made of mud brick, and of course that also must be covered with a roof. Why, once you expose it, must you cover it? Because exposure to the elements, to rain, especially to any water, is going to melt the brick, right? It's not going to last, so you're going to have to be very careful with it. Well, that's mud brick with straw. Let the labor be heavier on the men, and let them work at it, so that they will pay no attention to these false words. So here, Pharaoh shows his hand. He's not punishing the Hebrews just to punish them. He's making the point, and the point he's making is he wants to discredit Moses in the eyes of the people. Pay no attention to these false words. What's Pharaoh doing? Publicly calling Moses a liar. So the taskmasters of the people and their foreman went out and spoke to the people, saying, thus says Pharaoh, I'm not going to give you any straw. You are to go and get straw for yourselves whenever you can find it, wherever you can find it, but none of your labor will be reduced. That's just passing on the story that Pharaoh has just commanded. So the people scattered through all the land of Egypt to gather stubble for straw. The taskmasters pressed them, saying, complete your work quota, your daily amount, just as when you had straw. Again, a reiteration of what Pharaoh has already commanded. Why, if Moses has already recorded Pharaoh's instructions, why did Moses find it necessary to repeat as part of the story that the taskmasters carried out the orders and the people indeed having to do that? Well, because it makes it very real for the reader that this is not just theoretical, this is not just like another government order that may or may not have been carried out to the full extent of its letter of the law. Well, here it's very clear the letter of the law was indeed followed. Moreover, the foremen of the sons of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten and were asked, why have you not completed your required amount, either yesterday or today, in making bricks as previously? So when the people, and you can see the writing on the wall, how could you possibly, working hard as it is, how can you then work even harder when you don't have the actual raw materials in which to do your job? And so they fail to meet their quota. I'm sure they worked very hard, but they didn't make the quota. And on day one, and then on day two, they blow it. And so they're beaten. The question is, why have you not completed your required amount of the yesterday or today in making brick as previously? And then the foreman of the sons of Israel came and cried out to Pharaoh, saying, why do you deal thusly, this way, with your servants? There is no straw given to your servants, yet they keep saying, make bricks. Behold, your servants are being beaten. But it is the fault of your own people. But he said, I'm not going to take your excuses. No excuses. I'm not going to accept your cries. Am I supposed to feel sorry for you? Shall I call you a wambulance? He says, no. Instead, he says, you are lazy. And not just lazy. You are very lazy. I know you're lazy because you said, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. You were lazy before. I made it harder for you. You're still lazy. The idea of sacrificing to another god. So now go and work. Let me say it again in case perhaps you thought I stuttered the first time I said this. Go and work now. For you will be given no straw. Yet you must deliver the quota of bricks. The foreman of the sons of Israel saw that they were in trouble. And how? Because they were told you must not reduce your daily amount of bricks. How many times in this limited text has Moses now communicated to us that the Hebrew slaves are being forced to make straw, to make bricks without being given the materials, and they have to gather the materials themselves? Is this like time number 5? Time number 6 at this point? You get how horrible this is. This is not just like, hey, it's part of the story. We got to get to the part of the story so that we can get to the first plague. It's not just like a piece of story to jump over. This is the story. Moses comes back, and the people are like, I'm bowing low, and I'm worshiping the Lord because we are getting out of here. And Moses goes, and he had this big burning bush experience. And God said, I'll be with you. And Moses goes, and he says, not let my people go free. Let my people have 1 week vacation so we can worship. It's a religious holiday for us. And Moses has made things twice as worse as they were before he came and before he opened his mouth once. Well, when they left Pharaoh's presence, they met, that's the Hebrews, the slaves, the leadership. They met Moses and Aaron as they were waiting for them. You remember that at the burning bush, God told Moses to go with Aaron and together with the elders of Israel and speak to Pharaoh. And that's one component, going with the elders of Israel, that is conspicuously missing from the text. And, you know, the ancient Jewish rabbis, they noticed this discrepancy here, that the command was for the elders to go with them. And, you know, we're behind you, we're backing you up. And in other words, we're taking ownership as well of this. We're not just sending Moses and Aaron. We're going as a group. Solidarity! And there's an old Jewish midrash, famous story. And the story basically goes that Moses and Aaron set forth, that, you know, we pick up the story after they saw Moses' signs and they bowed and worshiped, they believed, and then they're going to Egypt, right? So in between chapter 4 and chapter 5, when Moses and Aaron are in front of Pharaoh without the elders, the story goes that Moses and Aaron set out with the elders. the group, right? Representatives from each tribe. And then as they traveled along the way, one by one or in pairs, in groups, the elders began to drop out. This guy says, ow, I stubbed my toe, and I better turn back. And his friend says, I'll go with you. And another one says, I forgot I had the soup still on the stove. I didn't turn the stove. I better go back. And one by one, as they make their way along, each of the elders drops out, leaving eventually only Moses and Aaron to go face Pharaoh. And I think it's a good story because it shows, if you read between the lines here, it shows that the leaders, while they were excited about Moses and Aaron confronting Pharaoh, they actually didn't have any ownership in this. And so when you don't actually have any ownership and true solidarity with the people who are speaking on your behalf, you don't buy into the program fully, that when it doesn't go well, you don't share any of the responsibility of it, and you can actually, when it goes badly, you can turn on your spokesman. And that's what happens here. When they left Pharaoh's presence, they met Moses and Aaron as they were waiting for them. And they said to them, may the Lord, again, covenant name, may Jehovah look upon you and judge you, for you have made us odious. You have made us loathsome. Hebrew, you can read it as if you have made our breaths malodorous to Pharaoh. You have made us stink. You have made us loathsome creatures in Pharaoh's sight and in the sight of his servants who are over us, to put a sword in their hand to kill us. It's a very Jewish response. Why don't you just kill me now? Right? Why do it slowly? Get it over with. Just kill me now. Right? You've put a sword in their hands. So the Hebrews take their misfortunes from Pharaoh, and they squarely dump them on the shoulders of the brothers of Moses and Aaron. You have given the Egyptians an excuse to execute us, not just to beat us, but you've given them an excuse to execute us. And so any Hebrew blood that is spilled thereafter is going to be on your head. Moses speaks to the Lord. He asks, as well, like the Hebrews should have initially acted and brought his people's complaints. He brings these before the Lord. He returns to the Lord and said, "O Lord, why have you brought harm to this people? Why did you ever send me?" And there's no, by the way, I told you 5 times I was the wrong guy for the job at Mount Sinai. I told you find somebody else. I've blown it. And my people are worse off. Why did you ever send me? Look at how rapidly the Hebrew situation has deteriorated since I've arrived on the scene. And so he questions God's call and God's purpose and his role as deliverer. And contrary to his expectation, the people had not in any fashion been delivered. Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done harm to this people. And you have not delivered your people at all. You had big promises. All right, I'm going to take the people to Sinai. You've not delivered your people at all. I love that, at all. Not even an iota. Like there's no movement. In fact, it's backward movement. And we'll see, this is where we'll end. We'll see the Lord's response as chapter 6 begins. And the Lord said to Moses, you're in a good place. Let me immediately reassure you. Because now now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. I know you're upset about what he's done to your family, to the Hebrews. But now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh. For under compulsion he will let them go. And under compulsion, not only will he let them go, he will drive them out of this. Not just let them go passively, he will push them out. Pharaoh rejected the Lord's initial request. And so God is going to make Pharaoh an offer he cannot refuse. What that offer is and how it plays out, I'm afraid we'll have to wait until next week to see. But it's an amazing text, right? It's an amazing story. And I didn't even show you Charlton Heston today. It's an amazing story. When you just read the story, it's an extraordinary story. We're taking our time because I want to enjoy every juice. This is not a meal that I want to rush through, wolf down, and then let's go out to the. I want to savor each bite of this extraordinary story. And so for us today, what this text leaves us with is that question that the story begins with. Who is the Lord? And most of us in this room, I'm certain, know who our Lord is. You not only know him intellectually, but you know him relationally. But there may be some here today, and certainly there's some who are watching, who are not so certain. You may know about the Lord, but you don't yet know him. And so I want to invite you today, and well, as these lessons accumulate over time, I want you to ponder the text question and ask, who is the Lord? And not just who is the Lord, but who is the Lord to you? Well,